Hello, Chris Levine. We have not spoken for like 10 years.
Yeah, it's been a long time. Still
Yeah.
standing, still here. The world changed, but here we are.
Well, lovely to see you. For those that don't know you, you're a light artist with a multidisciplinary approach that harnesses a diverse array of technology with the intention of revealing the ways in which light is fundamental to human experience. You're best known for the Portrait of the Queen, The Lightness of Being, Kate Moss, Elton John, and I am delighted to see you again.
Thanks, Julia. Yeah, I'm not sure whether I'm going into a therapy session that's going to be public or where this is going to go, but inspired to go on this little journey with you.
So I've read your biography and that you've been through many challenges, from being bereaved when you were 18, when your dad died of alcoholism, and your own addiction issues, and also your sort of huge success. So I'm curious, what are the particular challenges that you have faced or are facing? And what is it about them that have been so difficult?
Gosh, where to dive in on that one? I mean, I think, life is just one big lesson from the moment we're born to when we die and beyond our real understanding of what that serves. But, Buddha says there's no wisdom without suffering. When you think of things going on in the world today, I'm not going to complain. But yeah, my dad dying when I was 18 was a train smash.
What was it about that was so? I mean, I guess it's linked to his alcoholism, because it must have been a bit of a train smash before he actually died.
It was absolutely dysfunctional family and all that. And he was traveling a lot. He was very successful in what he did. Then it all over a couple of years just went into complete chaos and lost everything and just died. And then when I said goodbye to him, I didn't think he was going forever. I just thought, see it. And I said, my last things I said to him were, see you later. But yeah, at 18, we need that guidance. I mean, I've really missed him as a father. One of the big things I always thought, if I ever had children, because my dad used to travel a lot. Even before he died, I think when I've got kids, I'm going to be around, I had
I
a
want to
student.
do it differently.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Even though I saw what alcohol had done to him and, that just set me off. I mean, I just went into overdrive, anything that would disconnect me from my feelings. And,
To block
um,
the pain.
yeah. And, drinking just went to a different level. Even as a teenager, it kind of worked for me.
Is your understanding that addiction is hereditary? It's that what was modeled that's what you saw, how to deal with difficulty, or do you think it's genetic? Kind of logic would tell us, if you've seen the impact of an alcoholic father, one would do the opposite, but that isn't what the stats show, which is you're much more likely to be an addict if you're the child of an alcoholic.
Yeah, and it seems to be a common thread, apparently with a lot of with male addicts is some kind of abandonment with the father seems to be a real common thread, and certainly a lot of the people I know in recovery, that's the way it is. But whether it's genetic, I mean, I think it's a really complex thing. I think addiction is human behavior. There's a big part of just how we function, and we get into patterns of behavior. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, you'd think seeing what happened to my dad, that would be enough to, I never want to drink, but it was completely the opposite. I remember I had my first little taster when I was about 6 or 7,
Oh gosh.
because I see this thing in the house that, what was this thing? They'd use decanters and they'd put, and it was obviously really important to them. It was almost like ritual. Everything was revolved around this, them imbibing this, whatever it was. And so I remember my parents had gone out or away and we had an au pair, and then I just had a little sip of these little spirits, and oh, that's interesting.
The
Then I had a
heat
little more,
feeling, that kind of warmth, the glow.
the glow, and I don't remember it from then. I remember I loved it, and I made myself really sick. I remember my sister had to cover for me. Oh, Chris ate too many pistachio nuts,
Oh wow.
so that secrecy, what at that
That
age.
goes with it, the illicit, naughty, which is exciting too, no?
It was, and I used to, when they would have parties, I'd go and get a little can of something, take it back to my room and drink it, and I'd like it. And it was very secretive right from the beginning. But I remember, as a teenager, it filled a hole. It literally
Yeah.
filled something. And
Oh,
and once you had a taste for that, it's you just want to be in that glow all the time. I mean, anything else is dull, and
yeah.
or the things start to surface, and that's how I dealt with things. So to feel good, I want to feel even better. If you feel down, want to feel like, I just wanted to change the way you feel. Didn't like the way I felt.
Yeah. And that first experience is the relationship you took into it. Like it's exciting, it's secretive, it gives me a glow. And then that big hit, really, which I think millions of people recognize, is it fills the hole. But of course it doesn't fill the hole. But it's the story you tell yourself, I'm going to feel better. But then you need more and more to do the same job. And that's where the cycle really gets.
Yeah, it starts with alcohol, then you get involved in anything but it's also addictive behavior. It's not just the chemicals and the substances, it's just distracting yourself from going inside and what you feel inside.
So what was the fallout for you? So I imagine you followed your own addiction to a point where, I don't know, tell me.
Yeah, well, he died just after my 18th birthday, and it was at a time where I was thinking, I mean, I wanted to be an architect, actually, but the idea of 7 years to qualify, or I can go to art school. I'm artistic. I can get a place at art school. 3 years, I'm going to leave home, move to London, and have a good time. And by the time I left Chelsea, I was addict and alcoholic. I was every day, using something and starting to smoke a lot of pot. And
So was your life chaos? Were you not creating? Were you
yeah, no,
chaotic?
I was. I've kind of felt that this was my artistic license. I got stoned and I would listen to sounds and I would make things. And I remember my first night at my hall of residence at Chelsea, I didn't go to the gathering of everyone, all the
The newbies.
the newbies. I didn't go because I was upstairs in my room getting stoned out of my head. And part of that was because I didn't want to go and face everyone as well. There's a shy character who didn't want to go and had the social anxiety. So no, and I justified it. No, I'm doing these. And I've still got the little drawings and stuff I made.
Have you?
That this is what I should be doing. And it became very part of how I would create, was to get into a zone, and I would get stoned to do that. And I thought that was, I had license to do that. You do that for too long, and that's the only way you know how to function. And it was for a long time feeling that it's a tool for me. It gives me insight, and takes me to higher dimensions. And there's a spiritual dimension to it. I think now that, when I meditate now, I can see I was fooling myself, but that's just my journey. I had to, but it could sometimes short circuit you to different states of being, which were very sensitized. Felt
And creative.
and very highly creative, to the point where you can't, even when I've had a project I was working on, a piece I was working on, I wouldn't want to think of it until I got stoned. Then I'd tune into it. For a long time, that's why I couldn't. I'm in and out, because I've been in and out of recovery my entire adult life, basically.
Oh, have you? So you'd get out and then you'd fall off the wagon.
Yeah, repeatedly. And I was, for a while, I was 12 years clean. I didn't do, and clean means, I mean, NA, Narcotics Anonymous, is total abstinence. That's the baseline. And then you start to do the work. But recovery isn't just about just being abstinent. It's the self-development, it's the steps, it's the work that you do to grow. And I really was that naive when I first went into treatment, that I just need to be in there for a couple of weeks, just need to get clean for a bit. Then I'm going to discharge myself. I'm going to sort my life out. I just need to stay clean for a bit to get myself together enough to deal with everything. And then once I was in there, and even to the point where I was in there and then scheming to get drugs sent to the rehab, and that nearly happened, but it didn't. And in the end, I wasn't there for 2 weeks. I did the 7 weeks primary, and then I was 7 months in the halfway house. And I haven't had a drink since.
Oh, wow. So that was the final one, in 20...
Well, in 1989, I had May the 29th, 1989. I remember I had my last drink, but I've been, and I was 12 years clean, but then been in treatment, another 4 times during that period. I didn't pick up a drink, but, prescription pills and every other mood altering substance known to man, but not drinking. And I couldn't have not had a drink for that long, had I not been dealing with the way I felt with other things, other mood altering substances.
So it feels, I mean, as I understand you, it feels, there was the kind of traumatized little boy who had this kind of hole inside him that needed to be anesthetized. And there was also this kind of part of you that really went into an altered state and could be creative. So that is a very seductive story, but also there was truth in it. But I guess the little boy and being creative were connected, were they? That he could find a way of speaking for himself or being expressed when you were creative.
That was how I did it, and that was the only way I knew how to do it. And that I had a lot of resistance to NA, Narcotics Anonymous, because I felt that was kind of groupthink. I felt part of my creativity was totally about doing something unique and being me. And if I got involved in a program, what mind program, or I had a lot of reservation about that. It would take away Chris
Your creativity.
and my creativity. I wouldn't be able to. How? We'd all be doing the same thing. I like to do things that are different. But now I realize that actually the most resonant Chris is going to be, and my best work is going to come from here.
So you're pointing to your heart, or
my
is
heart,
it your
absolutely.
soul?
I can really freeform and channel my work and express my work more lucidly by being more in touch with myself and being more heart present than having my mind distorted. And there might be definitely times where those distortions would enable me to kind of manifest some interesting kind of expressions. But ultimately, I realize, and more, that my best work, and I feel my best work's ahead of me, actually. And it's taken me this long. And it's the journey from here to here. I remember we moved
from your head to your heart.
Is the long journey, isn't it? But I remember we moved to Ireland for a year, thinking, I'm an artist, I can work anywhere. And the fact is, I was flying back and forth to London, but we lived in the most beautiful place. It was really remote. We had our own beach there. It was absolutely amazing. I remember I woke up one night, bolt upright in the middle of the night, and it was like something said to me, Chris, it's all about balancing the heart and mind. That's what you're here to do. That's what we're all here to do. And it was really, and it really wasn't then. It was at a time where I was, I thought about getting stoned from the moment I woke up, then I just had to get practical. I've got children, I've got a family, I've got phone calls to make, but it was always having to kind of navigate that. It's been like a handicap, to be honest. Like now, where I'm at now, it's taken, so that 12 years of total abstinence, but I wasn't going to meetings. I wasn't working a program. I was completely obsessed with my work and going like a maniac. And
you still had that sort of soul emptiness, but you just moved from one addiction to another.
Yeah, one behavior.
And longing to be stoned.
Yeah, I mean, that was what always had to happen first. And then you deal with everything. No matter you felt good, you want to feel even better. You feel down, you want to lift yourself. It's sunny, got to really appreciate it. Oh, it's raining, want to feel better. Anything. And that's a daily thing. And that went on for years. But during that time, never picking up a drink, really put the fear of God.
White knuckling it.
In reflection, I think, with my father, I didn't want to go near alcohol. And I knew that, as a functioning addict, I could keep things pretty together, but I knew alcohol would destroy me. And I think, looking back on it, if there'd been alcohol in the mix with all the pills and everything, it would have been game over a long time ago. We wouldn't be having this conversation. No question about that.
But it's really interesting how, and I'm sure it's true for a lot of people listening, there's the belief if I stop the actual behavior, if I stop the drinking, then I'm dealing with the issue. But actually, it's never the behavior, it's the trauma beneath it. What's the pain, not what's the addiction. And you hadn't been dealing with your underlying pain.
No. My mother was very petite. And when I was born, my feet were clubbed because I was in them very tight. Nowadays, they massage those back into position, the soft bones. Then they cut you open, break the bones, reset them, break them, reset them.
Oh,
one leg and then the next. Over a period of months, I was in and out of hospital, my legs in calipers. They couldn't anesthetize me because I'm a baby. I couldn't express myself because I was only a year old. And my mother taken away from me.
That's real abandonment and terror of the pain.
Awful. And it's interesting that I've always felt that was so long ago, and that I've, layer and layer of my life experience on top of it, but that I was wrong because that's been at the core of it. But in the treatment, in the various times I've been in treatment, one of the things they get you to do is you write your life story. When you arrive, you write all the things, and then you share that with the group. And I've done it a few times now. And the last time I remember writing, and I wrote about my feet, and I was in hospital, in and out of hospital, fine. And I got to the bit, you know, when my father died. I knew, well, that's a bit I'm going to break down in group. But then the last time I did, when I read my life story out in group, and I got to the bit about and then I was in hospital, I had operations on my feet. Something for the first time, I just broke down,
Did you?
uncontrollable, sobbing. I'd done that a few times before, and I'd read that quite clinically, and then moved on. And then, you know, I got really emotional talking about my father. But this time, I really connected. I went straight to it, and
Oh, wow.
I
So it was in
stopped.
your body. Yeah.
And
You
it,
look quite tearful now, even remembering.
yeah, well, it's, you know, it's yeah. And I remember my son, when I was Jago, I remember he broke his leg, and I remember lying in bed next to me. He was a similar age, but he was about 18 months, and he had his leg in plaster. And that really set me off. I mean, just lying with him there, same age, you know, because I
Oh,
think, you know,
wow.
we build our life experience on top. And we hope we could talk about meditation, because these life experiences become part of what we are, and we build up layer on layer on layer. And then we're holding, you know, our life experience in a physical state in
In
us,
your body, in
in your
the
body.
casement of your body, as it were.
But that's not just our normal state, so we're not really realizing. So when you get still, when you meditate, you can be objective, you can observe it, then you can let it go, but you don't realize it. And deep at the core of us, and you know, the idea of being comfortably numb, you know, not to feel, basically, and you're comfortable not feeling, whatever the feelings were, you know, you couldn't really, they were difficult.
Access them.
And even I don't have a kind of relationship with pain. And Eckhart Tolle talks about the pain body. And I think even if I have a slight headache, it's like, you know, any kind of pain, it connects me with something much bigger. And I'm
Which is the baby with his broken legs, right? It's such an early
imagine
wound.
being into a baby who can't express, and literally snapping
Oh,
nerves and resetting them
oh,
without anesthetic. I mean, and so I had, you know, these scars on my feet, and I think that messed me up, actually.
yeah, I'm sure it messed you
Yeah.
up. So there was the treatment center, but that just stopped the drinking. You white knuckled it, roller coastered it, and there was still making good art. But was there a sort of final event that happened that connected your head and your heart, and you were enabled to kind of face the pain and live with it in a different way?
Well, I think it's been a gradual process. It's been like a real handicap of kind of dragging, you know, because you're not functioning at
It's like
full.
a monkey on your back permanently, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. From the moment you wake up.
So what happened that you finally got the
I think
monkey off
I
your
think
back?
for me, really, this time the big difference is that I'm not doing it alone now. You know, I absolutely feel that working a 12-step program, and
Do you
uh,
go to meetings?
I go to meetings. I've been the new phenomenon of online meetings now, where, you know, during the pandemic, it all shifted online, and you can have a meeting anytime you want it. And there's a
Amazing.
24/7 one that I go to, and there's people all over the world, and I'm on it every day. Whereas
Good for
before,
you.
you'd have to plan to go to a meeting, and then I'd feel, oh, I'm tired, I don't want to go, or I'm busy. And I have to keep myself tuned to that every day. But the big fundamental difference is to do with a higher power, this idea. And they say that, you know, NA is a spiritual, not religious program. It really is. I'm completely a-religious. I love to go into a church. I love to meditate in a church, and I surrender every morning. It's God's will, not Chris's will. And I remember one of the times in
The
treatment,
ego, you put your ego down.
you do, and to be guided and to pray for guidance. And I've seen evidence of you do the right things and the right things happen. It's just how things work. Trusting in
Doing
a
the
higher
right thing.
power and having faith, not fear. You know, my default position when I would wake up would be fear of the day and having to deal with everything, being overwhelmed.
And fear is the enemy of all creation, isn't it? Really.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's this idea that there is in the human condition is just love and fear. It's like a double helix of love and fear. And it's all the interactions between love and fear. And I think part of that thing of my childhood and the operations, everything was fear, was a fearful thing.
So are
And
you released from the fear now?
I have to, I mean, like I say, I surrender every morning. I hand my will over,
So it's never over.
and I do that with a relief. I often do it with a sigh. Sometimes if I haven't done my ritual because I've been traveling or I had to forget to do that, then later in the day I realize then it's Chris alone dealing with things, up against everything. But if I feel I'm being guided and there's a higher power, and really it's a loving energy I can tap into. And otherwise the default is a fearful one. And it makes
That's really
all the
interesting.
difference. And that's been the big difference now. I feel now I am back in recovery. It's not about just not, getting high or whatever, or it's about, behaving differently. And it is connecting with a higher power that has given me that strength, that clarity.
Very
It is
beautiful.
full of challenges, isn't it? I mean, life is.
Yeah, life is difficult. So help me understand the psychological process of how you express yourself through your work and the meaning of the work.
Well, this kind of phrase is coming to me, and this idea, that it resonates. And when I did my show at Houghton Hall, I actually put it on the wall as that stillness is a portal to the divine. And I think if you can get still, you can get through the noise in the mind and the ego and what that person said to me and all that noise.
All the raggedy what ifs and
Life stuff.
shoulds
And meditation is a tool for guiding me and for being able to listen to that higher power. You can pray, and you get still, and then you can be guided. Sometimes, I remember I go on these 10-day Vipassana retreats, and they say
in India, is that?
You can do them all over the world. The first one I did was in Kathmandu, and they say that Vipassana was Buddha's gift to mankind. It's been handed down generation to generation by a teacher. And I found it at a time where it was in 1999. I was in a real, and I thought, this is it. I'm out of here. And I was really.
You wanted to die.
Yeah. I mean,
that low.
It was getting to that point. And in the course of a week, I kept hearing about Vipassana. I'd never heard of it before. And then a friend of mine said, a friend of mine's just starting a course in Kathmandu. Go on, drop everything, Chris. You're in a bad way. So I went from here. 48 hours later, I was in Kathmandu. Never been there before. Never heard of Vipassana a few days before, but it was like obvious.
Some higher power.
Shown. So the current teacher, Goenka, he could have been at any one of 1,000 Vipassana centers around the world. He hadn't been in Kathmandu for 7 years. He arrived at the same time that I did.
Wow.
It was absolutely meant to be. And, when I did the Dalai Lama's portrait and I mentioned, and I met Goenka, his eyes lit up, Goenka. But that was a real turning point with Vipassana. The idea is that you do 10 days to try it out. Then you give it a fair trial, because you can read about it, theorize. Until you've actually experienced it, it's meaningless. So give 10 days a trial. And I thought when I went there,
and that's silent meditation, is it?
Silent meditation. It's a vow of silence. You don't really even have eye contact with people. It's all about turning the attention
inwards.
The dials inwards. That's really where the refuge is. That's where the peace is. We look outside for it, all these external things to fix us but actually, really, if you're trained and you have the tools, and with meditation, that's why stillness is that portal. And then you realize that state that you're in, because then you can observe it. Then you realize, if you imagine like a rubber band's knotted, and then you let those little knots go, when you get still and when you meditate, you can start to see that, and then you can start to let it go. And sometimes you can really feel things recalibrating and palpably shifting. And Buddha knew this, and Buddha, knew that how fast the light went around the earth, and everything is energy, and frequency and vibration. And if we can and I did a title to a show once, which I called Stillness at the Speed of Light. Because when you really get still, and that they say with Buddha and Nirvana, this realization that we are just a mass of subatomic particles, and it's all energy. The future hasn't happened. The past is gone. It's all about the present moment. It inspires me. In a world that is so crazy at the moment, there's a lot of darkness, and just to be somehow working with light,
be the light,
somehow channeling it and playing with it, is just, I think it's been my salvation, actually.
So was there a particular mindset that you needed, and creativity you needed to bring? So these two different portraits I'm thinking of, which is the Dalai Lama and the Queen. Was it relational? Was there a way that what you brought is what brought out the light and the quality of the portrait in them?
I think my best work, as any artist will say, is where you're channeling it. It's lucid. You're manifesting it. And I remember when I did the Queen's portrait, it was not long after I first was getting into meditation, and I'd done a retreat, a 10-day, not long before the first sitting at Buckingham Palace. And so when I come back from these, I'm really quite evangelical about it. If the world meditated, there'd be no wars. We'd be more compassionate. We'd love each other. It's the species, we'd evolve quicker. but I was very conscious of her breathing. The camera needed to do a sequence of images from left to right, and it needed to recalibrate. And I wanted to time her breathing with the movement of the camera. So I was close to her and doing the camera pass, triggering it with her breathing.
So with the breathing, is that an attuning so that as she breathes, you attune her breathing? So there's a meeting between the two that creates a third entity in a way.
Everything is to create like a harmonious state. Like if I create an artwork, or if I create an experience with a laser experience, or using sound as well. I use solfeggio sound, which is sacred geometry applied to sound. But that the experience that you have with it is you harmonize with that. There's a resonance.
I mean, does it feel like a holy experience? Because there's a lot of research psychologically about music as medicine. So you're talking about one particular, there is a lot of evidence about how music affects us psychologically.
But music is sound. Sound is energy. We are energy. And if you can get those harmonious resonance parts of the body, you can retune the body and bring it back to, there might be distortions in it. But boy, this is ancient wisdom. And I'm trying to channel that, bring that into my work, for it to inform my work, to create experiences that take my audience into the present moment.
When you can be present in yourself and still within yourself, that creates an energy and a sort of force field that releases you to have creative ideas, but also the ideas that you create, you want people to have that energy in themselves, that moment of absolute sort of centeredness and stillness, so that they can begin to be in touch with the divine in themselves and divine in the world.
Yeah, so I am expressing something which is manifesting. And I think really, I think with the Queen's portrait, and in my best work, I feel I'm just channeling.
So tell me about the Dalai Lama one, because if you're a meditator and spiritual, that must have been like meeting God himself, no?
But kind of, yeah. Because what happened was, after the Queen, people say, "You've done the Queen; it's downhill, isn't it?" I mean, who would you really like to do it? It was always the Dalai Lama, the spiritual leader of our time, and David Bowie. And I was going to do David Bowie. It was going to happen. Sadly, he passed. But the Dalai Lama, he never sits for formal portraits. But I would get asked a lot. So that was my natural reflex answer. So I put it out there a lot. I'd say it a lot.
And so you manifested it?
Well, I did. But how it happened was bizarre. So I was doing a lot of work down at the Eden Project at the time, and I met the creative director. We were planning something to do there during the winter. We bring a lot of lasers down to the Eden Project in Cornwall. He said, well, rather him come all the way up to London or me go all the way down to Cornwall, let's meet halfway in Bristol and we'll brainstorm and we'll work out what we're going to do. So I went to meet Peter off the train, gave him a hug, and his phone rang. Literally, I hugged him and his phone rang. And it was a curator that Peter knew. Peter, we're trying to get in touch with Chris. Do you think he'd be interested to do a portrait of the Dalai Lama? Do you have his contact details? He said, I don't know, ask him. Now that is
what a moment. What a moment.
Yeah, goosebumps thinking about it now. Whoa. There have been a lot of things like that in my life where
serendipity.
But then, where how that kind of played out was that, so the Dalai Lama was coming to England and he was going to give a blessing at Glastonbury Festival. And the idea was that I would do the portrait backstage while he was at the festival. But meanwhile, I was in treatment again. And I said to my counselors, will you let me out just for the day? I want to go to Glastonbury Festival to do a portrait of the Dalai Lama. It was like, yeah, sure, Chris.
Sure.
We've heard all
that's the place to go.
and then you'll come back, right? Yeah.
More drugs at Glastonbury than there are anybody in the planet on that particular day.
Honestly, I mean, but anyway, so they didn't agree to that. But the next day, they let me out. He was staying near Heathrow Airport. He was leaving for America the next day. And we set up a studio next to his suite on the top floor. We got the one next to it, made it into a studio, and I shot the portrait then, and then did go back into treatment. And I put that as a sign, and I feel like I've done a deal with God. If I do the right things will happen. I'll get to develop my work with light, but the deal is stay on the path.
And for you, the kind of inspiration of light and force and energy, where do you know where that comes from? Is it something that is an inner force that you express through light? Was there an experience?
I think it's all energy. And I think, and one of the things about is that I like to,
Do you have a sort of formative experience that led you to be inspired by light and
well, I
look
mean,
for?
definitely when I saw my first laser, it was a real moment. And I've never forgotten it. And then when I later saw my first hologram at the Science Museum of Dennis Gabor, the inventor, it was a hologram that you press the button, he would appear, then he would disappear. I just kept pressing that button. The rest of the kids moved on, and I was blown away by it.
So there's something about it that just
Yeah.
got you in the gut.
And I was born the year the laser was invented, and I just had this love affair with lasers. And it's getting interesting now because the technology is developing. When I was first into it, they were gas-filled glass tubes. They were scientific instruments, basically. They weren't meant for developing like as an art form. But for me, my work is very sensorial.
It's the
Can
senses, all the
all
senses.
the senses and bring sound into my work increasingly. And they're expressions of energy. And if I'm in a good state, then things I will express in a more resonant. So I, really do feel that the more well I am, the more healed I am, the more alive I am, the more the work, or more energy the work will have.
Yeah. It'll be a truer expression of who you are internally. If you're really at peace within yourself and have this sort of meditative quality within yourself that is quiet and not frantic and busy,
Mm.
then that psychologically gives you a huge bandwidth to follow a creative image or idea or path, doesn't it? It goes into a creative network, actually.
It does, and it taps into that, and things can flow from that. And stillness is a beautiful thing.
So I'm meditating and I feel much more open to spirituality, actually. And I would love to know that, to be able to find that sound and play it for meditation.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Is
And
that possible? No.
I like to think that there are the kind of different octaves of reality. I think we're just sensitive within a bandwidth. And I think somehow, stillness, you can increase that bandwidth. We're just sensitive and dialed in within our five senses to reality as we perceive it. But, you know, I think with the work, even just for moments, sometimes you can increase that bandwidth. And in doing that, it can induce a meditative state for someone who doesn't even meditate, just because they're transfixed in the present moment and just in, hopefully something that can give you a sense of awe. And that sense of awe is good. It's vital. It somehow cuts through all the noise and all the distortions, because we are bombarded, aren't we? In modern life. And I don't think we've really evolved quick enough to kind of process it all and deal with it.
The noise and the
The noise
busyness
and the
and the
onslaught of
fracturing.
information is just, and so you can wake up sometime and you're exhausted because you've been dreaming, and that's been some kind of feedback of stuff that's been going on during the day. That's why my hair's like this. If I didn't meditate, I think I would have spontaneously combusted, well, it would have been game over. Yeah, it was a real game changer in my life. It's difficult though, 10 days,
It's a long time from your
family
family
and
and
career, and it's difficult. I'm due for one now. I haven't been for a couple of years, and I usually, sometimes I've been and I'm practically on my knees when I get there, you know.
and you can feel the knees are crumbling.
Yeah.
What I understand about meditation and mindfulness is that when you can step back from all these different parts that are constantly kind of front of mind and pushing you, and your striver or your busy person or your problem solver, your angry part, all these different parts, when you're in them, you have no agency about how to shift your attention to them. And what mindfulness does in a sort of simplistic form, and I think there's a spiritual form too, is it enables you to step back, to have a space between you and these different sensations, thoughts, feelings, buttons pushed, that then you have a kind of inner stillness and you can choose.
Yeah, and that Vipassana really is all about, observing those sensations. Because actually throughout the body, if we get, I mean, the first 3 days of a 10-day Vipassana course is literally just being aware of the air going in and out of your nostrils for 3 days.
Oh
You
my
know,
God, that would
or
drive me insane. I don't know
it-
how you would do
well, the
that.
first time I did it, got a migraine after 3 days. It was just me and my head.
Oh,
I know, honestly. But then you go through thresholds, but that develops a sensitivity for the sensations that are going on. And once you've got tuned into that, then you start to scan your body, and then the realization that there's all these sensations going on all the time. And we're normally reacting to them. And as we move around in our chair, we're kind of figuring, and your breathing's changing all the time, depending on the situations that you're in. But if you can get to a point of just observing it, just watching it, then things recalibrate, things pull back to center, and things readjust because we're held onto this state, a reactive state to all these things. It's energetic things going on. But if you can just observe it, then it can bring it back to a harmonious center. And then you're dealing with reality as it is, not reality as you want it to be, and then trying to force everything to work with how you want things to be. You're starting with the truth. And the truth is your starting point from a place of composure. And then you can do things, and then you can manifest things, and you can make things happen because you're dealing with things as they are, not as things as you want them to be. You're starting with things as they are, and then you can make them as you want it to be. It's manifesting, really.
it sounds both very simple and very, very hard to do.
Profoundly simple. Yeah, absolutely. It really is. And this idea thing, just as you said, the idea of 3 days and you with yourself and you with your head and just having to focus it. Like I said, the first time I did it, I did get a migraine, and it was really difficult. And sometimes you can be meditation, really, you were sitting there thinking about things for the last half an hour. And then, so it's all really about entering the space between thought, and it's a very difficult place. And as soon as you realize you are, then that's a thought and you've lost it.
You lost it.
When you get into that state, truly present state of just being and observing, it's beautiful. And the meditation, certainly it informs my work as an artist. It's a life tool. I mean, Steve Jobs often would say that some of his best ideas for Apple came when he would go on these retreats, and you get these ideas. And I do, sometimes, I wish I had like a notebook, but sometimes I've left my retreat on the 11th day, and I've parked around the corner and I've written down all these ideas that came to me. Lightness of being is all about meditation. And I mentioned to the Queen when I was showing her the work in progress, because the formal title, I thought equanimity, and that came to me in meditation. This word that's used a lot in practice of meditation. I mentioned to her that I go on these 10-day vow of silence retreats, and she looked aghast, but she said her meditation was her gardening in Balmoral, and she was going there the next day, and that was really beautiful. But there are different ways of getting into the present moment, into a meditative state, but the observing your breathing and that as the portal, and the sensations in the body, and just observing them, getting still, that's the way it's the way I've gone.
And it sounds like that's really enabled you to find yourself and then create most kind of intensely from that state.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's an honesty. I think if I feel it and it comes to me easily, then I think other people feel it too.
Yes, the more it's your reality and you're expressing your reality, the more powerful we will connect with that. So do you feel like you have more of you to give to the world?
Well, I'm very interested in the idea of working at sacred sites.
Oh, like Stonehenge.
Well, Stonehenge, and I did some work recently at Giza, and is to work at these pyramids, to work at Stonehenge. English Heritage had given me permission to meditate at the stones. I thought the first thing, it's a long-term project, and the idea, first of all, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I feel drawn to it.
I love Stonehenge.
Oh,
There's something about it that's just, I find so profoundly monumental and awe-inspiring.
it is. And I want to tap into that wonder, and channel that wonder and that mystery. And, why do they go to such trouble to move these stones? And I think really it's to do with earth energy.
So do you think those sites have a sort of spiritual DNA?
100% they do. I think of the earth as a being, and as a sentient, like the solar system is almost like a family. And that the earth has, if we think of everything as energy, it has circuitry to it. The earth has its chakras. The earth has its nodal points of energy, and called ley lines, actually. And a lot of these megalithic structures and a lot of sacred sites are positioned on these grids. And somehow they channel the flux of this energy field. Some of these big stones, you can control the flow of this energy. They're conductive. Certain stones do it. But why and how do they use this? But also you think that they're also connected to the cosmos. There are geometries encoded, timescales encoded into some structures, one of which is the precession of the equinox. It's a 26,000 year cycle that's encoded into stones, ancient stones, 26,000 years.
Oh my God.
But at certain times of the year, at these formations, the Earth, because it's in relation to the position of the planets and the lunar cycles, at certain times, these energy fields are intense. And I think it's probably to do with our pineal gland. And I think that's got a function which has been pretty well switched off in modern man. But I think the ancients, it was a really important part of their being. As electrical beings, the pineal gland is a really...
Is that like your spiritual antennae?
I think it probably is. Yeah. Yeah. But I'm trying to feel that as I tune into a work. And I did a piece called Quadrivium, and it was installed in front of the Great Pyramid in December. And Quadrivium is the study of mass, astronomy, geometry, and sound. And every aspect of the piece was drawing from the ratios, the numbers, the geometry of the Great Pyramid, and trying to channel that into an object that had some kind of resonance to it. So you put your attention onto it. It's like a harmonic resonator that you put your attention onto, and it would somehow connect you and your circuitry, your consciousness with something bigger. And how big? I like the idea that I've done some things with lasers that are still shining into space, that those pieces are getting bigger at the rate of 186,000 miles per second. Every second, those light sculptures are getting bigger.
You look so excited talking about them. That thrills you.
It does thrill me. And I think I've got so much, more to do. I think in a way it's been a long journey to here, and stopping and starting and everything we've talked about, but it's now starting to get interesting. I think the technology is caught up with, I'm doing things now that I would have done at Chelsea at the art school and at St. Martin, but it's now come of age. The technology's there to really realize some of what I want to do. And I've got more of a platform now to do it. And,
So you can make your dreams come true.
You can. That's it. That's really, absolutely, we can. But you got to dream first, haven't you? I mean, how can it come true if you haven't got the vision? You've got to kind of make it happen.
That's a lovely place to stop.
I enjoyed that.
I could feel your energy.
A therapy session with Julia that's going to go public. I don't know where I was going to go, but I've done lots of podcasts, and this is quite unlike. I spoke about things quite candidly.
I really appreciate that. I sort of feel as we've spoken that you've found the force field within yourself. From an hour ago when we started, you feel much more light and more free than you did when we started the conversation. I don't know if that's how you feel.
No, you're right. It's true. Life is a miraculous thing. We can get so caught up in the stuff that's right in front of us and all that. But if we can step beyond it, and we are participating in something quite miraculous, and even just for glimpses, that you can tune into that, on a regular basis, then that's enough to kind of keep the life force flowing.
And that does feel that when you can kind of be most in touch with yourself in reality, right. In some ways that does open the door to the divine and to the sort of freedom of aspects of ourselves that isn't to do with our kind of neofrontal cortex, our thinking, but it's to do with kind of aspects of ourselves that we're often just not tuned into, that are divine.
I remember at Houghton Hall going around at night sometimes, and I would hear what people were saying about the work, and they wouldn't know I was the artist, but I'm just over here. And I remember this teenager saying to his mom, I don't get it, but I love it. He felt it don't have to go work through some intellectual filter.
No,
you just
experience it.
Experience it, absolutely.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for being so open and inspirational.
Oh, thanks, Julia.
Hello, Emily and Sophie. We are going to talk about Chris Levine, that rather genius artist. And I wonder what came up for you.
I mean, I think one thing is just the sort of intensity of energy listening to Chris and how he talks and the passion with which he talks. And like, it feels like even in just his conversation with you, everything he does is like to the extreme. And some people are, like have that kind of energy intensity about them. And so like, even when he sort of did meditation, it wasn't like, 15 minutes of headspace every day. It was like, I'm going on a 10-day silent retreat where I'm literally not going to speak to anybody. And I think I'm more of this 15 minutes of headspace every day kind of person. And
I'm more like 5 minutes every day.
Oh, 5 minutes. Yeah, let's be realistic. And so there's something for me totally fascinating about somebody who can sort of dive so deep, and that sort of thing of being able to completely empty your mind and kind of just be completely immersed in whatever it is that you're doing, with like whatever his passion has been, he's been completely immersed in it, sometimes to his detriment maybe. But I suppose that I am really curious about that and fascinated by that, because I find that hard. I find it difficult to be like completely engulfed by something, I think.
Yeah. It's a different operating system, I think, to our particular operating system.
Yes, or at least mine and yours. Maybe safe.
Maybe not so much safe. Different.
Well, I'm thinking about two different things, and I'm wondering which track we're on, because I was thinking, and you talked about it with Chris, but we've also talked about it before as a family, or that sort of addictive quality. I would say that, Mum, you would say you definitely do have, not about meditation, but that thing of being really compelled by something. Focus, yeah. and you've channeled that in really helpful and healthy ways in your life, but you were also conscious that you could channel it in ways that weren't healthy and helpful for yourself. So there's that bit, isn't there, which in some ways I imagine is not so dissimilar, that ability to be very compelled by one thing that I think is common to addictive sort of traits in people anyway, which is something I actually really don't have. In fact, I find it incredibly hard to form a habit. Like, I was thinking today, I did exercise in the morning and I was like, I've been doing it for over a year and I still don't really get a kick out of doing it. Like, when will this feel habitual?
I think you just don't really like exercising though, so it might just be that exercise is not your thing.
It might be that. It might be that, but as a family of which most people are quite routine, I'm probably more unroutine in the scale of our family. But then, on the other hand, if we're talking about a kind of a more spiritual approach to life, I was thinking when I was listening, we were a family that didn't really grow up within a framework of spirituality. It wasn't something that you and Dad sort of particularly a part of the way that you've related to the world, is it, Mum?
No, I mean, within it, the sort of that you were Jewish and went to synagogue once a year, and I was Christian, we went to church once a year. I mean, that was about it, wasn't it? Really?
I'd just like to say that I'm not sure we did go to church once a year.
Okay. Well, I did.
But we went to
schools. You did. We went to Christian schools.
Yes.
But I've always been a bit more spiritually inclined than you guys.
You have, which I really like. I'm trying to be spiritual.
I don't know. One has to be.
But... what you're doing, Mum? But
I like how you're both laughing at me. No, I have.
No, I actually no. I was saying that in a mean way, but I actually totally believe you. I just am wondering.
It's since I came back from Costa Rica. Yeah. I have a little song that I play every morning before I do anything else, that I step outside with and look at the light and sort of be grateful for the day and have a kind of moment. It takes about 2 or 3 minutes. Like everything I do is always like short.
That's great though.
And then I have a closing ritual, which is the same. It's the same song. It's the reverse. And I haven't done it every day, but I've done it most days. I did it today. And I do want to kind of gather more spirituality into myself.
Why?
Because I think it is kind of nascent in me, and I've just always been in such a rush. I've sort of ignored it. And I think getting older, getting closer to death, to wanting to deepen my experience rather than kind of run towards something, I'm curious about spirituality.
And I suppose just sort of spirituality just means such different things to different people, doesn't it? I mean, I wouldn't say that I am a spiritual person, really. Maybe like I'd like to be. I'd like that sort of version of myself. I like the sound of it, I'm not really. But I suppose that sort of, in my mind, does that make me sort of sound like somebody who isn't able to sort of see the glory or the enormity of nature, or the, just the sort of little tiny beauty in things of, like what my children do or whatever. And I don't think it does. I think you can still appreciate those things. And is that a form of sort of spirituality, just being able to sort of appreciate how small you are in comparison to the rest of the world? But I don't have a sort of practice, I suppose. So maybe that's the difference.
So interesting. I'm interested. I don't have the answer, but I'm interested in the question, about are we sometimes using the same, different words for the same experience, or are they different things? I imagine someone has a more evolved thought out there about what exactly we mean by spirituality. I guess it involves a higher power, maybe. I don't know, but I found myself quite drawn to things that are close to the spiritual, and then felt quite embarrassed and a bit awkward about it. I think maybe because that wasn't our family culture, or even particularly the culture of any of my friends. And I also think we're living in an era for a while that has been quite anti-religion, sort of pro-science, for lots of understandable reasons. It's not a judgment on that, but in the West that's more normal.
Or in the UK.
Oh, in the UK, that's true. Sorry.
UK, Europe. Yeah.
Okay. And then yet when I've gone to, because I love dancing, when I've gone to sort of conscious dance experiences where people tend to draw people who are more spiritually inclined, and there's incense and candles and music and ritual spaces, I've really loved them, but then felt a bit strange about that. And I was, Benj had a bar mitzvah after me, but I was the first to have a bat mitzvah when I was 13. I think one of the things I've noticed is that those things are quite helpful portals into a more peaceful, connected state of being. That's probably why they draw me, is they seem to link up to my kind of heart or heart space kind of experience, where I feel more open, I feel more held. I think that feeling when I feel connected to life bigger than myself is a very soothing experience for me. And rituals, I find a really helpful portal for that, like as a way of helping transition out of one headspace into another kind of way of being. Like me and Jake now, my husband, have a monthly night where it's in the diary, and we have a few little objects that we get out, and we light a candle and some little scents, and we just kind of usually go outside and look at the sky because it's in the evening, and we just sit around for a while in silence doing that. And originally we were going to talk about stuff, but it turned out we never could be bothered at the end of the day. So we just do that instead.
It's a being. It's lovely there.
There's a nice moment of connection. Mm.
And I think what I really got from Chris, which links to what you're both saying, is that the spirituality is a portal to balancing your heart and mind. And I think that's what I understood for him, is that his spirituality and his practice enables him to take the monkey off his back and his chattering mind and kind of connect to something that's bigger than himself, and that is vital. And for him, and I think all of us have the capacity to be spiritual beings. And so I think if I see it like that, that's a really helpful, useful way of seeing it. And rituals are like habits for soul, right? I mean, that's what they are.
And I think I'm quite a sensory person. I think that's also why they appeal. Or maybe most people are in different ways, but definitely I enjoy the sensory element of those types of experiences, the smell, the touch. And I think one of the things that Chris was saying about faith we had that lovely analogy of faith and fear as the sort of helix. But the way that faith, I think I've definitely had quite a few clients, and also when I spoke to an addiction specialist once, who that higher power element of AA or NA is just hugely helpful and important. That somehow surrendering control in that way really allows them to make different choices. That's sort of an orientation shift away from that desire to control and need to get rid of discomfort very quickly, and that more fear-driven, impulse-driven is held or is easy to let go of with that sense of this higher power, which seems to have really worked for him, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And I've definitely, when I was speaking to this addiction search just a few months ago, she was saying, I mean, obviously this is very black and white, but she was saying, if you're in a state of addiction, everyone needs AA. Like that those groups, because they're not just the groups, aren't they? I think it's such a powerful model because it also creates social connections and a community and an experience of de-shaming and structure, and people, sort of fellow travelers and people who are not in your addiction circle who are still using whatever you're using. So yeah, I think you're a big fan of AA, aren't you, Mum? Is that right?
I'm a huge fan of AA, and
I'm a big fan of the Serenity Prayer. I think everybody could do the Serenity Prayer.
I love this one. It comes into my head all the time.
It came up with a client yesterday, actually, with me. I've been reading a new book by a colleague of mine who I love, actually, is a woman. She's called Jan Winhall. And she has developed this new model which combines polyvagal theory with focusing, and it's particularly useful for trauma and addiction. And her definition of addiction is this, which I think really fits with Chris, but I think it fits with all of us. It is that it helps you in the short term, hurts you in the long term, and you can't stop doing it.
I mean, then I think what I really appreciated about your and Chris's conversation was like the messiness of recovery. I think you often, like, if you watch films or documentaries, that like there's this arc of like, okay, you get more and more addicted, then you hit this sort of rock bottom, and then you go into recovery and you get clean, and then like your life is all better, or not all better, maybe still hard.
And you're not just better, you're bigger and better. That you've grown from it. And
yes, whereas I think most people's reality is this, like recovery from addiction is much messier, and maybe you move from one addiction to being addicted to something else, and you kind of go round and round and round. And I think it's incredibly helpful to sort of normalize that, because I think otherwise lots of people sort of feel shame around it, and that just sort of continues that kind of cycle, then sort of feeling ashamed and being more likely to relapse. And recovery is very hard and not usually linear.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right.
Almost never linear, I would say, isn't it? I think that's really helpful. And I thought also he was useful in debunking the myth that you need to be fucked up to be creative. That was a story that he had been quite invested in. I'm saying fucked up as a shorthand, but that whole sort of story arc that we've heard lots of times, when actually he's now in a place where he feels like actually it more honest, more true, more authentic, more real. He can channel that creative aspect of himself now that he's able to be more present in himself, which I think's helpful.
Useful.
I've definitely known friends who I've had that conversation with, where it's like, well, what if I become okay, but I stop being creative anymore?
Or I'm really boring.
Yeah.
I think that's true. I think that there's definitely this sort of myth around drugs and alcohol make us more fun or more creative, and you sort of lack inhibition, and like this whole sort of socially created myth too, and that there's like a fear of if I lose that, then I'm going to lose my creativity, or I'm not going to be like life and soul of the party or whatever.
Like my best friend Catherine said, I've been a bore for the last 35 years since I stopped drinking.
Right, exactly. And you're not. You're totally the life and soul of the party.
She said, you've been a crasher ever since, she said.
But she still loves you. So.
She still loves me.
But when you think about the sort of, geniuses like Van Gogh, like Jackson Pollock, often they are people who struggle and maybe struggle with addiction. But I would think about it as like, it's not the alcohol or the drugs or whatever that has made them creative geniuses, but it might be something about the fact that they are in pain and struggling. I think that often creativity can come out of pain and like the sort of darkness, like the sort of depth of human
the need
experience.
to express.
Yeah.
But we also don't have the counterfactual of how many of us struggle and don't create brilliant work, or how many of us are addicted and it's sort of a bit of a counterfactual situation.
Yeah. Yes, that just because you struggle doesn't mean you're going to be a genius, sadly.
Exactly. It's sort of correlation, causation.
Yeah. This is not an interesting thing to say, but I did just want to say that I just loved the title Stillness at the Speed of Light. Like, it really just sort of stuck in my head, and I looked at some of the images from that. I think it's sort of his most recent exhibition, and I definitely recommend looking at them, because there's just such a sort of power to them, and like the essence of each person that sort of just in the most literal way kind of shines through. And there's something about the sort of polarity of like life and dark and humanity.
And I think his creativity and what he designs and is commissioned to do links into very much what we've been talking about for a long time on the podcast, about how one's imagination is key in many ways of changing how we see ourselves and how we see the world. And that we can do it through the arts. We can do it through music and image and light, and that it's a fundamental to being human. I think his work, and then him talking about it, is a sort of powerful illustration of that. So we need to end there. And thank Chris so much for giving me his time and the really interesting conversation. And thank you all for listening.